Bir şey olursa araya girerim o zaman ben de.
Fingers crossed. Things will work.
I think we are live now and we can start.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Ozan, and Elif and Burak, do you guys want to do a little intro who you are, or people know you already?
They know us, actually. It's there has been a long series of webinars during the outbreak, but we are happy to host you both, actually. Oliver from Speedinvest and Ozan, our long-term partner, mentor, and friend, of course. I'll let you start with your questions. I think everybody can hear us. You can just say hi and how is the sound, etc. on the chat box.
Perfect.
And when Ozan is done with his questions and we are done with our questions, we will ask the audience's questions as well to Oliver. So please write down your questions on if you are listening to this broadcast on YouTube or here. You can just write down on the chat box.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ozan. For those of you who have been to Startup Istanbul, you know me as the bad guy who asks a lot of questions. That's why I'm having my T-shirt. I invest and mentor to startups on a global level. I did that in Middle East and San Francisco, and also in different countries around the world. I'm super happy to be kind of questioning Oliver here from Speedinvest. Oliver is probably one of the luckiest guys I've known. That's been lucky in the same way, because before everything just blew up, they were able to raise $190 million new fund. And I'm going to ask him how he was able to pull it off on this timing. But before that, Oliver, if you can talk a little bit about your background, why you dropped out of your PhD, and why did you start your Speedinvest journey?
Yeah, that's actually a good starting point. So I mean, at the end of the day, I always felt like an entrepreneur. I've never been anything else. And also, frankly, Speedinvest is probably the biggest entrepreneurial journey I've had in my life so far. But I studied business and philosophy. So I didn't know what to do with my life back then. And then business was too boring. So I started to focus more on economics and got actually a scholarship for the PhD program at Columbia in New York, which I gladly took. Nobody at that age, everybody wants to move to New York, right? But at that point already, I actually founded my first company, which was basically a university spin out together with a couple of friends around online simulations, pretty much a mixture between gaming and actually socio-economical simulation models. Very crazy. No business model, of course. But at that point in time, I had to decide, okay, what do I want to do? Another 2-3 years to finish my PhD thesis, or go back to Austria, leave everything behind, and focus on this startup idea. And simply from my gut and my emotion and everything, it was very clear that I wanted to go focus on the fun part of life, which for me entrepreneurship is. Yeah, and that was the beginning of my company. We raised 5 million right at actually the last minutes of the .com boom.
No,
so there's a pattern there, I guess. We were then very smart to spend it immediately. Like within only a year, we blew out all the money. So we did all the mistakes you could do. We opened 5 offices across the globe without any idea what to do there. And it was fun for a short period of time, but then for a long period of time, it was not fun. It was actually terrible. But we did manage to survive. We completely pivoted into mobile. We found ourselves working with mobile carriers, mobile operators, because they were the only ones that had money. And eventually, this company turned out to be working really well. And then, I bought out my investors. I merged with 2 other companies. And then 2 years later, eventually in 2006, we sold this company for roughly 60 million to Verisign, which was back then life-changing moment for me, I have to say, in many ways, getting rid of my loans, my private loans, which were massive. And eventually I moved to California for 2 years, worked with Verisign, tried to find myself in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
Lasted for almost 2 years, so good enough, I would say. And then moved back to, then we decided, you know, we have 4 kids, 3 of them were born in Austria, so they did want to go back to Austria, so we moved back. And it was pretty clear to me that I want to not go back to focus only on one specific operational role, but really work with multiple startups and apply my learnings. And that was the beginning of Speedinvest. So the idea was to set up a fund that is truly different from what I've seen before in European venture, which was frankly terrible and really annoying and just not a good relationship. And I didn't want to accept that that's the way it has to be. And that was the very beginning. I can talk a lot more about Speedinvest, but I guess we'll touch that anyway.
I think one of the things that struck me the most is back when you first get the Speedinvest 1 with, I think, 10 million euros, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were not many operator-led or founder background-led VCs. And one thing that you mentioned in a couple of places that struck me the most was I wanted to be really respectful to the entrepreneurs because I've been in that journey, and that's a philosophy that we have in Speedinvest. And the way I've seen it is you structured a very different VC where you are more like a service center to the startups that you have invested, and you have a lot of people that are either half-time or full-time or in one capacity or another truly engaged in the platform plus that you created. Can you tell us a little bit more on how you see operator-led or founder-backed VC or the others?
Sure. I mean, there is no one model that works in VC. Just to be clear, at some point when I started, I thought I'm the only one that understands how it's working, and everybody else is stupid. 8 years later, 9 years later, I respect my colleagues a lot more. I think there are really many ways to do it. We focus on the earliest stages of this whole value chain. So we focus on really pre-seed and seed. And my personal hypothesis is that the traditional role of a venture partner, of an experienced partner in a board, giving strategic advice and giving guidance, etc., that is really, really important, but it really is important once you're at a certain level. It's not that critically important if you're a 3-people team and you're just trying to figure out something, or if you're pre-Series A, it's different things that matter. And what matters is, at the end of the day, just getting shit done, winning customers, not spending money on stupid things, like really tactical operational things. And so that's the one reason why we focus so much on that part. And then the second reason, and it's maybe a bit more metaphorical, is I think the only way that the VC or the investor-founder relationship really works if there's massive trust and massive, so to say, a relationship where there's openness. And openness is driven by respect. And I personally knew that I did not respect my investors. Yeah? I did not. Why? Because they didn't help me. They were basically, apart from the money, they were pretty much irrelevant from my daily work. And so my question to ourselves was, okay, how can we make ourselves relevant? How can we make ourselves relevant to get the respect? Respect drives openness. Openness drives seeing things earlier, drives making decisions together earlier, makes hopefully a better result. So that's the logic.
And but that's very refreshing to hear, because most of the times I think the first time startups feel expect the investors to be helpful and to be trusting, but sometimes they underestimate the time they need to spend to align perspectives.
Yeah.
If that's not you don't start with that alignment first, or you just find the first guy who wanted to write you the check, forgetting about how important it will be, how long-term of a relation it will be. You might be really stuck with a bad relationship. But I think in Europe, most of the entrepreneurs didn't have too much chances until, let's say, 5-6 years ago, where there was not enough money on the seed stage. So they had to actually take whatever is offered to them.
Sure, totally.
Yeah. I think your first fund, second fund, now the third fund is going to show people that there's a different hope, there's a different structure in managing relationships with the startups from the investor point of view.
And it's not just us. I think there's a new generation of VCs in Europe across younger guys, much younger than me, actually, many of them, but also operators, people that have been there before. So there's a new wave. It feels different. It feels much more like actually the good US VCs, the good early stage US investors. So there's a new level of playing field, and actually I feel this wave of investors are also winning. They get the good deals, they get reputation, they get references, and it's people underestimate how important brand value and this kind of soft power is in our ecosystem. And it's pretty much everything we have, I think.
I think the way I had seen in while I was living in the Valley, it's really difficult to explain this to outsiders, because there are less startups than VCs in a way, and VCs are competing really hard to get into deals. Where in our part of the world, Europe is in a better position, but in Turkey and in other remote emerging ecosystems, there are only a handful of VCs, and they kind of reign in, and they drive the relationships, they drive the terms, and even angels have a certain leverage over startups in emerging economies. Do you think that will change post-COVID, where now this famous 15-mile radius does not apply to anything? The VCs that I've spoken to, that Brock was able to get in, said now we can actually reach to a larger base, because previously we also wanted to invest nearby, that we can see, we can feel, we can do. But now we have everything online, so why not do more deals a little bit further off down the road? But is that something that will stick on, or is it just like a 2-month thing that is not going to be an increased time frame? By the way, I need to turn the light on, but I'll be hearing you.
Yeah, honestly, I don't buy that. I don't think that's what I'm seeing. It sounds a little bit like marketing bullshit to me, to be honest. What I see is that a lot of investors pull back, a lot of investors pause. So I frankly, I'm afraid that the next 2 years will be the power shifts actually more again to the investor or capital side rather than the founder side. If I look at the last 2-3 years, it was actually the tables were really turning, especially more experienced founders have had the luxury to choose, and I see that changing. So I'm not so optimistic on that end, unfortunately.
So if you were a startup, you will reduce first, of course, reduce the valuation expectation. And second, the availability of funding is counterbalancing the availability of good startups and the opportunities.
Yeah, I wouldn't see why there should be less good startups founded now than half a year ago. I think that, so the supply side will not change. In contrary, what we will see is ecosystems maturing, becoming more sophisticated. We see emerging markets, countries. You see the first wave of serial entrepreneurs in the sense that they really built something big and sold it and then come back. So this kind of true, we invested in Barbaros in Turkey from EasyCo, right? And these guys are just so great. So if they once they come back into the game, even as an angel investor, as an advisor, or maybe even as a founder again, I mean, that's a real game changer. So in that sense, I'm on the sort of the supply side from the entrepreneurship, I'm really positive. On the capital side, I think the next 2 years will be tough. Yeah? There will be, I expect, I call them tourist investors, and there are a lot of them out there, and many of them will go back to their proper jobs. Yeah.
And I think yesterday we were also discussing the sudden disappearance of corporate venture from especially seed or pre-A, that were kind of trying to scout early stage deals, not just normal 10 million plus deals, will be like extinction.
Yeah, sure. I mean, those are like those half conviction driven CVCs will go. A lot of the family offices will go. A lot of the angels that have limited capacity will have to focus on their existing portfolio. A lot of the mediocre Me Too funds will fail to raise.
Yeah.
So there are consequences there.
So one topic that we discussed before was a remote possibility that LPs in first-time funds, less than 20, 30 million euros, that haven't done much deals yet, that's in maybe the first year or second year of their operations, there might be a possibility, there might be a chance where, unless their LPs are large, capital calls might not be answered. So do you also see this as a even remote possibility in Europe?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a widespread issue. I don't think so. I think it's going to be a really, it really depends how your LP base looks like. It depends if you have a large family offices, they typically will have only a small allocation to you. I don't think there will be a big issue. Obviously, not on the institutional side of things, but there could be, like our first fund, 10 million. Was solely based from other founders and other entrepreneurs, and then small angels that just wanted to support this initiative.
Yeah.
And of course, there things can happen. But I don't think it's going to be the biggest issue. It's going to be, if it's 10, 20%, it would already be bad. But beyond that, it would be extremely unfortunate.
Yeah. All right. So from that, I want to move into some of the questions as well and line them with it. There are some sectors that you are specifically focusing the investment mandate, especially deep tech, mobility, digital health, fintech. Some of these sectors will probably emerge stronger after COVID, like fintech. Some might be having some troubles, like the mobility. Tier Mobility was also, I think, very lucky to have raised the funding before this whole thing happened. And digital health, of course, it will be a normalization of technologies, adoption in large industries. When you look into your portfolio, and I'm sure you've done a lot of crisis work in trying to figure out what each company are trying to do you see any emerging trends on which lines will emerge stronger, or which you will need to maybe back a little bit more, which you'll just write off? Like if it's consumer tech, good luck, kind of.
Consumer tech, I wouldn't. I think it really is along sectors. I mean, we have, for example, a couple of edutech companies that cater directly to consumers. They are exploding. They are booming, right? We have a couple of consumer propositions in e-commerce, or actually we have our favorite startup called Flaviar. They are from Slovenia, selling alcohol online. They are booming, right? So it's not necessarily B2C versus B2C. I mean, there are really only a very few handful of sectors who are massively negatively impacted, and those are obviously travel and hospitality. That's tough, super tough. Actually, payment is also tough, because a lot of payment is driven by, again, travel, airlines, etc. So there are these very specific sectors that will hurt the most, and that's difficult. Not much to do other than trying to secure funding and runway. But that's obviously an area where people are very cautious to invest now before they understand where the whole thing goes. I personally am trying to fight internally, actually, against too strong bias around specific sector thesis within our framework, because we are a seed stage investor. We are talking about 5 to 7, 8 years anyways, right? So I don't want to make an investment decision based on a situation that is now, is it half a year, is it a year, but it's not 7, 8 years. And I think personally the shift to digital will be so massive across the board that if you have an extraordinary founder team in any kind of sector that's maybe not so immediately positively impacted, like edutech, or I would still do it. Like the industrial tech revolution will happen with or without COVID, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I think I'm in the middle of writing a piece, Dan, and the topic is all the accelerators failed to accelerate industrial tech and deep tech, but a virus was able to accelerate everything we weren't able to do in the shortest amount of time possible. Like everybody was talking about energy tech, deep tech, machine learning, AI, remote work, connecting devices for efficiency. And we weren't able to, the startups, I mean, we're not able to convince the large infrastructures that they needed this. But now, all of a sudden, you can't get anybody in the factory. And guess what? If you have invested in technologies, you could have been pretty much running the facility as is without the necessity of people.
At the same time, I mean, we are invested in quite a lot of deep tech companies. And it's a very weird situation at the moment, because on the one hand, they see that the interest, the demand, the need for this is now bigger than ever. At the same time, they're all locked into very traditional enterprise sales models, where traditional meetings go to is still prevalent, and so they do see also negative impact of this crisis in the sense that they don't close deals. So it's tough. Yeah.
I mean, that was a kind of a question I had in mind, not from maybe sectoral side, but from a business perspective, business model side. How would you advise startups that are selling in B2C? How would you advise startups that are selling B2 enterprise? And how would you advise startups that are selling into B2 small B, like SMEs? What should they do, or what should they try new to engage more with their customers? Because frankly speaking, I don't think trying to get into the short list of Speedinvest will be really quick. Although your average deal term is about 46, 50 days. But again, like trying to go to customers, I think should be the priority instead of funding.
Sure. Well, as a founder, of course, you have to do everything, right? There's no, unfortunately, you can't be too picky. But I think that question massively depends on runway. I think this crisis is also an opportunity to come out as a winner. So, like, we have a couple of companies that were lucky enough to raise nicely before the crisis hit, and if they are now in B2C or in a SaaS model selling to small and medium enterprises, they've pretty much across the board saw that the customer acquisition costs are going down significantly, less competition on Facebook, less competition on other social media channels. So if you are in that lucky position, which very few people are, you can actually really be aggressive. You can increase your brand. You can win customers. You play offense basically. If you're not in that lucky position and you have to work with very limited capital resources, it's a very, very different proposition. You then it's all product. Then you have to really focus on your product, try to polish it, try to learn, and really not focus so much on growth for now, and just really use the time to get the product right. And that's pretty much also what we are doing with our B2B companies that have traditional sales models. It is so we stopped big initiatives of reach out. We stopped massive business development efforts because most likely they would go to vain anyways. But rather work with the existing customer base and just get everybody come out in 12 months with a kick-ass product that wins, and then use the remaining resources. So that would be a rough way.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant advice. And I also had conversations with my portfolio companies, Of course, there's a level of, as you said, they have to keep being optimistic. Some were in the middle of funding rounds, some were graduating from accelerators where they had to do their online demo day without actually physically meeting the investors to impress them. But most of them were optimistic, and I cautioned them, like, again, much like you said, you need to balance a lot of things at this moment. But priority number one should be, how much money do I have left in the bank that I will survive? Can I delay some of the product development side because I need to now focus on reducing the runway without letting people go? And another question will be on this end, we were having discussions. Have you seen a lot of people reducing runway by either laying off workers or kind of being more frugal? Do you see that impacting startup positively or negatively?
Yes, I mean, that's also what we have been doing the last couple of weeks pretty intensively. I mean, wherever you are, you need to work with under the assumption that you have to survive at least 12 to 18 months with the money you have in the bank. That is the working assumption that we all take in our conversations. And then, depending where you are, which country, there are government subsidies, there are possibilities for short work agreements where the government comes in and pays for some of that. But in any case, that's something that needs to happen. And in parallel, this is the time where the internal investors have to step up. Where if there is a situation where the internal investors are seeing that you will be assets by coming to this 12 to 18 months, then we all have to put in additional money and support those companies. That's the other side of the equation.
Right. I think Brock has questions from YouTube.
Yes.
I can sum some of them into one question, which is, if you were to build a company now, where do you see the largest opportunities? Not from a virus-stricken or we're stuck at home perspective, but if you see this as a movement, if you see this like a small shock, what would this wake up? Where would you first look into in different opportunity seeking?
It's a good question. I guess my immediate gut reaction would be education. I hear you have kids, I have kids, and it's such a ridiculously low tech experience, and it's such a obvious need for much more and much more scalable innovation. And so in the last couple of years, edutech was super non-hot, right? It was really difficult to get funding for these companies. But I think that was a wake-up call, and that's going to change. And there is no clear winners. There's the incumbents are all coming more from the publishing industry. So there's a immediate. I mean, we've been talking about this for 20 years, but I think now is the time.
Right. And I completely agree. I don't think. I think a lot of people first went to digitizing content delivery, which was okay, but not, I think, from a K-12 perspective. So Coursera's, Udemy's, Udaciti's, they were mostly focused on people in different career paths to learn different things. But as I got closer to my daughter's agenda, how she's learning, how she's, in my opinion, sometimes not learning, and comparing the real experience back to her experience, I completely agree. There is a great room of opportunity for different niches. Even kids before 5 has huge potential. Kids between 5 and 18 have different potential. But I completely agree. Just digitizing content is not enough for these kids.
Exactly. There are so much differentiated ways to work with kids, different paths where they can really go into their personal interest and all the things that have been talked about in all books, but nothing yet where you would say, okay, this is the big company that is actually doing this, right? So there you can really build big companies, I think. Yeah.
And I
so
think
there are some questions from the audience from YouTube and also the audience here in the room. Some basic questions, of course. How do Speedinvest process their investment? What are their criteria? Which geographies, which stages? So how can these startups can pitch to you, or do you find them? These kind of questions. So let me start with the basic one. How do Speedinvest has a process of investment? Where do you invest?
Okay, that's pretty simple. So we are a seed stage investor focusing on Europe. So regionally, we are really investing in companies from the UK all the way to Moscow, where we invest in companies in Central Eastern Europe, we're investing in Southern Eastern Europe. So there we have a very broad mandate. We would not invest in emerging markets outside of Europe unless it's one specific sector where we have a long-standing history, which is Fintech. In Fintech, we also have a mandate to do deals in emerging markets. We did one in Bangladesh, we did one in India, etc. So that's on the regional side. Stage-wise, we love to do early seed deals, so that can go from really pre-seed tickets, 100K, 150K, and then all the way the whole range of seed up until 1.5 million as our initial check. We don't go beyond that. Within that stage, we always want to lead. We want to be the lead investor for that round because we invest so much resources and time and effort. We then have, with the new fund, with this 190 million euro fund, we have reserved roughly 60% of the capital for follow-on. So we can do up to 10 million in any given company or in the biggest winners of the company.
So and do you have also ticket size, average ticket size, or does it depend on the stages of the companies?
So in pre-seed, so we have a small pre-seed team that only does pre-seed. So their average ticket size is 150, and then our seed teams, which are sectorally focused, there the average ticket size has increased actually quite dramatically over the last 2-3 years. But now it's roughly 700K. Before it was more like 400K, but that is with this whole capital abundance has changed. Sector-wise, we have. So as mentioned, Fintech is a big area of strength within Speedinvest. Marketplaces, we have our own dedicated team just focusing on marketplaces. Industrial tech, everything there. Deep tech those are the four. And then we also invest quite heavily in health tech and consumer. So that's the area.
How do you fill up your deal flow? Do you go conferences or warm recommendations? How do you get the deal flow?
Yeah, so just to give you some numbers, so we are seeing roughly 8,000 deals a year, new deals. So that's quite a lot. We have a team, so we have offices in New York, in London, in Munich, Berlin, Vienna, and Paris. So a lot of people on the ground as well. We get out of these roughly 8,000, we get, of course, a lot of the high value deals from references network, but we're also very active at different events. And we're also on our webpage, everybody can apply and send us a deck, send us a short description. We do look at this. We are not arrogant and say we don't. Somebody needs to have a social proof, social connection. So please, if you want to reach out, especially on the pre-seed stage, on the early seed stage, happy to just send it through the website, and then it goes into a weekly circle where every team then looks at this. So you should get an answer pretty soon.
And a couple of more questions from the audience and for myself as well. So when you invite a startup team to a meeting, what are your red flags?
Well, you know that there's a process. If you run with that many startups, you have to be quite brutal in your selection process. So the first one is actually we try to identify very quickly, like, are we wasting our times, and are the founders wasting their times? So what is this? It's clearly if it's out of scope in terms of stage, if it's out of scope in terms of region, or it's also in topics like, I don't know, pharma or biotech, where we have simply no clue. So that's the first. It's easy. Second one is the opportunity big enough? Are people really we only with our fund size and our ambition as a fund, we want to invest into companies that can become truly big. What does this mean? It means that if we don't see that this company can at least be a couple 100 million in size, and not theoretically in 100 years, but actually in a high growth scenario, then we wouldn't be the right investor. So that's of course a very soft criteria, but it's one we want to see. And then one that is actually very often the actual reason why we decline fast is differentiation. Simply for any idea that is now in the air, we tend to see not 5, but more 30, 40 companies doing pretty much the same. And then if you have a company maybe coming from a small market with a fresh team that hasn't had any big credentials, and they're doing exactly the same as the other 35, it's very tough.
Mm-hmm. And while we are technically rehearsing this interview, I asked 2 questions. How did you met with EasyCo, and how did EasyCo investment was initiated?
So it was actually initiated by our Fintech lead partner, Stefan Kleestil, who back then was a business angel, mainly in the payment industry. And he knew Barbaros already from Cologne, when he was actually running Klarna in Germany. So long before the EasyCo team moved to Turkey, moved to Istanbul. So I remember them coming into the Vienna office really as proper German businessmen, very nicely dressed in suits and ties. So Stefan already invested a tiny amount himself and then brought them to our table. And we were also just starting as investors. We didn't have a lot of clue, to be honest, but we were just so impressed by Barbaros and the rest of the team, and took this wild bet that they would pack their family, pack their stuff, move to Istanbul, and set up a payment service provider, which nobody would have guessed, but it turned out amazingly well.
And you have success stories in your portfolio and also some fail probably stories. What is the common factor that startups fail in your portfolio?
Well, I think the biggest single factor I would say is lack of agility. I don't know if for lack of a better word, but we have a lot of companies that are just too slow to adapt, and maybe also don't have this inner urgency to do it. They just stick on too long to their existing thesis, being these are the right people to do my project with. This is the market to do my project. They're just too slow to react, and maybe also not hungry enough to change, or not. They don't feel the pain as much, right? And then they move into this slow death scenario where it's really hard to change things, also for us as an investor. And that's where the companies died, and eventually.
And following up questions, what differentiate the successful teams between the failing startups? I mean, failing teams.
Yeah, it is really coming down to the founder team. I mean, it is as simple as that. And the amazingly successful founding teams are truly obsessive. They're truly obsessive. They work day and night. They think of nothing else at that period in their life. They are also great. So in one sense, they're truly nerds and obsessive, but at the same time, they're also very, very good storytellers and salespeople, and warm and connecting, and it's very difficult to combine these two actually different elements in one person or in one team. But the top founding teams have that. Yeah, they can be detail oriented, product oriented, just losing their sleep over one single small element on their product, while going out there and telling a story that is just so convincing and everybody wants to buy in and be part of it, and that's rare.
Mm-hmm. So last questions from the audience. Probably Ozan mentioned that earlier. Which sectors and verticals do you think that will be winners after the outbreak? I mean, there is no after outbreak probably, but after these special times passes.
Yeah, I mean, I could now, they're the obvious ones, right? I mean, health is an obvious one. Anything, education is an obvious one. Productivity, remote work is an obvious one. But honestly, I wouldn't work around this thesis. I would, if I'm a founder and I have a passion for a specific problem, and it's digital. I mean, I would focus on digital. But if it's within that realm, focus on your passion. Don't do this in this kind of theoretical way. It's much more important that you understand it problem deeply and then really dive into that.
So Ozan, you were asking a closing question, so I was interrupted you. So let's close this great interview and insights. Please go ahead with your last question.
No worries. I mean, these are very different times, but looking from a general historical perspective, we had many crises before and we endured them. Behaviors are really difficult to change in this short amount of time, collective behavior. I think there will be a fear factor going gold, but back to business as usual mindset will first kick in until there's real change that develops. And in this time, I mean, one of my favorite questions is, do you see the world's perspective from west to east, from Silicon Valley to Europe to China, will be impacted through this when people are not going to be traveling to US for a long time, and travel will be limited, and that is the one thing that's different from the other crises, where it will really take a long time until we see each other face to face. So also studied philosophy and thinking on that. Do you think that will translate into different behaviors, different connections, different models of communication, not just communicating, but like understanding and trusting? Where should we focus on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I personally really, I think we will see dark forces and we will see good forces. And the good forces, exactly. The good forces are that I think this triggers change, right? This triggers change, cultural change and social change. And I think there are a lot of good things that will come out of it. People will be more aware of their impact on nature, on climate. People will be more considerate. People will actually understand that you can build relationships also digitally. I think that is, I don't know how your last 6 weeks were, but we've seen that it actually works, right? So we've done already quite a few investments in the last few weeks, just purely digital without seeing the founders at all. Yeah, so that works, and I think that's the new normal. It's a great positive, and that actually could create a real sense of community on a global level. The dark side is, I mean, you see nationalism, you see closing borders, you see blame games, you see suddenly protectionist measures taken, you see capital controls, you see all the shit that I thought we have left behind us. Who knows what wins, but I see both at the moment. Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to thank you. May the force be with you.
The same color.
Yeah. May the force be with you all.
Oliver, thank you very much.
Great
Okay.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Great insights, and stay healthy and stay safe.
Same to you, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.